A new chapter of diplomacy unfolded in Oman's capital Muscat. Nuclear talks between Iran and the US have resumed. Indirect negotiations took place in Muscat between Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff. This was the highest level meeting between the two countries since 2018. You might remember that in 2018, during his first term, US President Donald Trump withdrew from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. His argument was that he wanted to make a better deal with Iran. Now in his second term, he is trying to do just that. As part of this effort, he sent a letter to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, offering to hold direct negotiations regarding the nuclear program. However, Iran rejected this offer for direct talks. Instead, Iran agreed to indirect negotiations. That's how these discussions were able to take place between the US and Iranian delegations through Omani intermediaries. The first round was described as positive and constructive, which is a good sign. The aim of these talks is to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions and to prevent the emergence of a nuclear-armed Iran by any means necessary. Obviously, Iran would also want something in return for giving up its nuclear program. Iran wants the economic sanctions imposed on it to be lifted and the threats coming from the US and Israel to be reduced, because the Iranian regime wants to ensure that its survival is not threatened in any way. Sanctions have crippled Iran's economy. The country is facing huge inflation and massive unemployment. So there is a lot of domestic pressure on the Iranian regime. With the lifting of sanctions, Iran's international isolation would end, restrictions on businesses would be reduced, foreign investments would come in, the economy would recover, and public discontent would decrease. Iran desperately wants this at the moment. That is why it kept the option of indirect negotiations open. The US thought that if not direct talks, at least indirect talks are happening, and that was worth pursuing because at least negotiations would begin. The beginning of talks would give the US an opportunity to keep Iran's nuclear program in check. The US also knows that, at this time, war is not in anyone's interest. And if Iran agrees to nuclear disarmament in exchange for the chance to increase economic engagement, then that is actually a good deal. So in this way, the objectives of the US and Iran aligned, and indirect talks began. The US is in a stronger negotiating position in these talks because Iran has recently faced a series of setbacks. Iran-backed proxy forces have weakened. Israeli actions have caused huge losses to Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Meanwhile, the US is destroying the Houthis' infrastructure in Yemen. In Iraq, Shia militias are disarming themselves out of fear of US airstrikes. The pro-Iran Assad regime has also come to an end in Syria. So Iran's proxy forces in the region have recently faced one setback after another. All of these proxies are part of Iran's axis of resistance, created to counter Western influence. So it would not be wrong to say that, since the start of the Israel-Hamas war, Iran's axis of resistance has been weakened by the actions of Israel and the US. It could also be said that Iran's influence in the region has reduced considerably, while the influence of Israel and the US has increased. Now, Iran has come very close to nuclear weaponization by rapidly enriching its uranium stockpile, and now it fears that sooner or later, Israel will destroy its nuclear facilities. This is despite the fact that Iran has fortified its nuclear sites and dispersed its nuclear program across multiple locations. Many of these sites are built under mountains, making them very difficult to destroy. Iran's nuclear program is at a very advanced stage and cannot be eliminated with just one or two Israeli strikes. To completely destroy it, sustained air operations as well as ground operations would be required. However, this will not be easy, as other Arab countries in the region would oppose such actions. Moreover, this also goes against Donald Trump's campaign promise of ending forever wars. However, Trump being unpredictable, he has warned Iran that if a nuclear deal does not happen, military action will be taken against Iran. The US has even started increasing military mobilization near the region. We know how Trump uses a mix of diplomacy and pressure to make favorable deals. Now, under this new deal, if the US makes aggressive demands, such as Iran completely dismantling its nuclear program, including shutting down its civilian nuclear activities, then Iran will not agree to such terms. In such a situation, nuclear talks could collapse, and a widespread conflict could erupt in the Middle East. Iran has made it clear that it will protect its national interests at all costs, and will not accept any deal that is not fair and honorable. So how tough the next rounds of negotiations will be depends on the extent to which US is willing to offer concessions to Iran. Iran already has trust issues with the US. The US withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal and the assassination of Iran's top IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani by the US are major reasons for Iran's mistrust. However, Iran is ready to negotiate in hopes of sanctions relief, especially amid pressures such as its weakened regional position and crippled economy. There is a lot of pressure on the US from Israel. Israel wants to completely destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities because it fears that just as it secretly developed its own nuclear program in the 1960s, despite US objections, Iran could also develop nuclear weapons in secret, regardless of US opposition. And if Iran can do it, why wouldn't other countries try as well? That is why Israel prefers military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities instead of relying on diplomacy. This makes the situation even more complicated for the extremely pro-Israel US President Donald Trump. If he chooses military action against Iran to align with Israel's wishes, it could push countries like Iran to accelerate the development of nuclear deterrence, since nuclear weapons are seen as the ultimate guarantee of national security. Any kind of military posturing from the US and Israel could therefore trigger a nuclear arms race, which Trump clearly would not want. On the other hand, choosing diplomacy is not easy for Trump either. In 2018, he withdrew from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, saying he wanted a better agreement. By better, he meant demanding more concessions from Iran than before. The original deal focused only on Iran's nuclear program, but being pro-Israel, Trump would want the new deal to also include restrictions on A. Iran's ballistic missile development, and B. on its support for proxy groups in the region. Since Trump openly supports Israel's expansion, reducing Iran's influence in the region is necessary for that. As a result, Trump would seek broad concessions from Iran, while Iran would want to limit the negotiations strictly to nuclear issues. This makes diplomacy equally challenging for Trump. Trump, who wants to end the ongoing wars as quickly as possible and create a business-friendly environment by bringing stability to the region, has set a deadline of 2 months for new nuclear deal with Iran. The nuclear deal is very important for Iran's economy and the stability of the region. If the deal goes through, then all is well. But if Iran does not accept Trump's terms and the talks collapse, then forget ending the war. A new and broader conflict may begin in the region. Iran's enrichment of weapons-grade uranium is an existential threat to Israel. So if the talks fail, Israel is likely to launch preemptive attacks on Iran, just as it has done in the past in Iraq and Syria, and even previously in Iran. The latest such strike on Iran was in October 2024, which damaged Iran's nuclear facilities. In the past, Israel has assassinated Iran's nuclear scientists, stolen nuclear documents from Iran, and infiltrated its military, all aimed at disrupting Iran's nuclear program. Considering these historical actions, the chances of Israel launching further strikes on Iran after the failure of talks are very high. And if that happens, Iran is expected to retaliate by targeting Israel, US bases, attempting to disrupt trade by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and accelerating its nuclear program due to the perceived threat. This would likely draw the US into another conflict in the Middle East, potentially leading to a prolonged war. The US has already stationed its B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia and is transferring Mk-84 bombs to Israel. On the other side, Iran is also preparing for a potential conflict by rapidly advancing its missile capabilities. If you follow the news, you may have seen videos of Iran's underground missile cities. Clearly, both the US and Iran are gearing up for a possible confrontation. Israel has long desired this outcome. Under its Begin doctrine, it is planning to attack Iran in the middle of this year. However, diplomacy remains a more effective way to address Iran's nuclear program than military action. Right now, the situation is highly volatile. The negotiations for the new deal are fragile. The future remains uncertain, and everything depends on how the next few weeks unfold. We'll soon find out whether the Iran Deal 2.0 becomes a reality, or whether a new conflict begins in the Middle East. Let us wait and watch.